Really? The day or two after they were there. Oh, really? Wow.
Right. Hello everyone. My name is James Cotton. Thanks very much for making the time. I'm a part-time resident of Space 54 and an owner of the park since 2002. I appreciate you taking the time to hear my opinions on this big, very complex, very interesting document called the Purchase and Sale Agreement. This is the copy I've been reading for the past several weeks with my tabs and notes and highlighting, and I have to say I've given up a lot of Saturday and Sunday mornings and weekends and evenings and thinking about this thing and trying to figure it out. Quite frankly, it's a big, complex document. I've talked to a lot of people in the park, and a lot of people have said, yeah, I just haven't read it. It's because it's a big, complex document. It's not a very fun thing to read. I'd rather read Harry Potter, right? But it does affect your lives. And so what I'd like to do tonight is spend a little time sharing my insights on having read the document, spend a lot of time analyzing it, and tell you these are the things I think you should look at very carefully if you're going to look at it, you know. So what I want to take you through is an assessment of what I see as the risks in this document, okay? Life is full of risks every day, right? You decide to cross the street, that's a risk. I mean, there's risks in everything we do, and we have to make choices about what risks we want to accept. So I want to give you my views on the risks inherent in this document, accepting it or rejecting it. I want to talk about the timeline and probabilities that we'll get to closing. Okay, this is a complex real estate transaction, and a lot of this document is about from, well, goodness, there was the, I forget what it's called, not the initiation date, but the effective date of the document was October 1, when it was signed, and there's a 60-day period for ratification, and then if there's ratification, then there's a due diligence period that gets us to closing, and all of this is about how do we get to closing. And so I want to talk about the timeline to get to closing and the probabilities of that actually happening. The reason I want to talk about the probabilities of it happening is your money's at risk during that period between now and closing. And that's very important. It's not Big's money at risk, it's your money at risk. I want to talk about risks. You know, a lot of people are concerned about, well, what if we don't buy? I've heard that this is the only thing that's going to save the park. Well, let's look at those risks, because like I say, life is about making choices and risk-based decisions. And then let's think about your options going forward. And this is, I will give you my opinion, but I want you to come away with your own. So, what I'll do tonight is I'll do an overview of this document, the 56 pages of the main, the 65 pages of attachment, the summary of the key clauses. I'll talk about this pathway to closing. The buyer transaction expenses, that's a very big, important part of this. The conversion costs. I want to, you know, it's interesting when you read a document, a lot of times people read what's in it, and it's very important to read what's not in it. And there's nothing in this document about the Mellow Act or the Coastal Act, and that is significant. The document is silent on the Mellow Act and the Coastal Act. But right now, that's the law of the land. Until the Supreme Court case gets decided, the Mellow Act and Coastal Act apply. I want to talk about how the deal is funded and how it's possible that you could lose equity. Even if you just say, look, I want to sit this out, I want to sit on the sidelines, it's possible that you could lose all the equity that you have in your home based on the way this deal is structured. I want to talk about how the seller eliminates all his risk. Biggs is a pretty smart guy. He didn't get to be a really rich guy by being foolish. He's structured this in such a way that he eliminates a lot of his risk in this transaction. He eliminates risk for himself and unfortunately increases risk for you. And eliminates this, there's a couple of clauses in this document that I'll take you through that eliminate risk for those who do not want to buy their lots. Or sorry, eliminates equity, not risk. Increases risk. Now, then the other side of the risk assessment is what happens if we don't sign up? What are the possibilities, right? We've been hearing a lot of stories about bankruptcy and park closure, et cetera, rent increases, you know, we'll talk through all of those. And then some next steps about what are my choices, which form do I want to sign? you're going to be getting a ratification packet, right? Have you heard about that coming soon, everyone? The ratification? That's the document, in this document, this big thing, and then there was the presentation by Mr. Rodriguez. They talked about a ratification packet. That's where you would approve this deal. And one of the things that you're going to be asked to sign is a piece of paper that's in here as Exhibit J that says, I approve. It doesn't say I approve the deal. What it says is I won't sue Biggs. Okay? But that's a condition to approving the deal. Now the other thing you could do is sign a very simple form from the state of California that says, no, I don't approve this conversion, right? And I'll take you through that form as well. What I'd like to do, I know when Mr. Rodriguez did a presentation on this, his summary of the deal, he didn't want to take any questions as he went along. I'm happy to take questions, ideally on the slides that I'm talking about, rather than, I don't want it to be a sort of random walk of, you know, whatever pops into your mind. Apologies about my phone. And so if we could, I'll take questions about each slide that I talk through, and then if there's general questions, we'll take them at the end, because I need to be conscious and fair about everyone's time, yeah? Is that right?
Sounds good.
Okay, so what's in this document, this huge thing, the PSA? Well, there's 17 chapters, or sections in the main document, 56 pages. Those are the numbered pages, that's easier. Then there's the exhibits and schedules, A through P. Those are the unnumbered ones, so it's really hard for me to say turn to page 113 because there is no page 113, right? And I say here that exhibits A through P, a lot of them are benign or omitted. That means they're just not really that important. And all the stuff that's kind of in just normal black text here, I'd say also not as important. The stuff I think that's really, really important to you is the red bold. The purchase price, the due diligence period, conditions, closing, exhibit J, et cetera, et cetera. So what I want to do is talk through just those sections that I've highlighted, because quite frankly, the other stuff like closing and escrow, it's a bit boring. It's just normal real estate transaction gobbledygook. The stuff that's in the red bold is very material to your lives. So, now I said questions on any slide. This one is the entire document, so if you have a question on anything in the document, I'm happy to answer it here. Or we can talk about some of the specifics, yeah?
Yeah.
So, I want to go through each of these, 2, 4, 6, 13, 14, Exhibit J, etc. So here they are. First, the purchase price clause. This is the one that has the purchase price. I have to say, I've had trouble figuring out how much we're paying for the park. I know we're paying $9.4 million for Biggs's note. I know we're giving him 60% of the lot sales at the back end. I know we're paying our transaction expenses, except we're paying those up front. But there's no actual price. There's no thing that you can look at that says, here's the price. There is something in the document that says the minimum lot sales is $28,741,000, blah, blah, blah. But that's not the price. Anyway, but what's more important in section 2 is this buyer transaction expenses. And why is that important? All the buyer transaction expenses are funded by the buyer. What we're doing here is we're being asked to, we want to buy a property, and we know it's substandard. There's stuff wrong with it, right? There's the hillside, to say the least. There's electrical problems, sewer, lighting, lots of problems. So the guy who owns the property says, hey, I tell you what, if you pay to fix everything up, I'll sell it to you. And that's basically what this deal is. So the buyer transaction expenses, I promise you, is a very detailed listing of all the stuff you as the buyer have to pay to the seller before he sells you his thing. So he's basically got a defective piece of merchandise that says you pay to fix it up and then I'll sell it to you. Now, the other important part about that when I say the buyer's funds are at risk is if you don't get to closing, all the stuff you did to pay to fix up the property, it's gone. Okay? I mean, it's here, It's, you know, like maybe you painted the curbs or fixed up the pool or whatever, or you fixed the electrical system or the plumbing or the sewers or whatever. So sure, it's here, but you don't get it back. And normally you'd think, well, shouldn't the owner of the property pay to fix the infrastructure rather than the buyer? But that's the way this is structured.
So, so are you saying that it's funded by the buyers through the rent increase? Is that?
That's a very small part of it. I am saying that. I will take you specifically through how it's all funded. It's mostly funded through what's called buyer contributions. So the rent increase generates about $250,000 a year. These buyer transaction expenses are estimated to be $9.7 million. So $250,000 a year takes about 36 years to get to the 9.7.
No part of the rents that we're paying to Biggs will be applied to the, aside from the 150, none of the rest of the rents gets applied to the fix?
Correct. Only the, exactly, what happens is the rent increase of 150 goes into a special fund, a buyer transaction fund, and that money can be used for park improvements or for buyer transaction expenses. Your normal rent goes to
Biggs, period.
profit. Now, the thing I get a bit concerned about is how do you draw the line between what's normal operating expense and what's upgrade, right? It's a really complex, you know, it's a very gray area. Wouldn't it be normal that if there's a failure in a plumbing or electrical system that's a fault and that's operational cost?
Yeah,
Or is that an upgrade?
it's always a fault and operational cost when you're a landlord, you know.
I imagine though, if you're Mr. Biggs, you would say, no, that's part of the improvements. So it's a very sticky, difficult situation. Yeah.
As I crunched the numbers and you just came up with the amount that the rent increase is gonna yield for the money, I was like, well, where does all the other money come from to pay for all this stuff in the purchase? And that is on speculative lot purchases, correct? So they're hoping that they can sell enough lots to generate the funding to fix everything, and that's speculative, correct?
I must call it technically buyer contributions,
Okay.
but I would say in reality it's, yes, speculative purchases.
We don't know how many people are going to be able to get financing to buy their lots. We don't know how many people are going to actually want to buy in to this deal.
But there's a requirement that 80 lots are purchased at closing.
What
So
happens?
if there's 30 people in the park who say, yeah, great deal, and the rest of the people say, no, then hey, there's 50 lots that need to be bought by somebody who's got deep pockets to say, yeah, I'm interested in speculating in some California real estate. So yes, I think that's what it is, but technically, according to this document, it's just called buyer contributions. Now, a buyer doesn't have to be a resident.
Right. My second question on that is, if it is just a small group of people that wants to buy it, and they can't, other people could come in that don't live in the park, and they can start buying as well, right?
I believe so. I'm not certain, but I believe so.
I actually I emailed the board about that because after one of your blue flyers came out, when you used the term grabbing or whatever it was, gobble up.
It wasn't my blue flyer.
It was your
Oh,
mother.
was it that rabble rouser? Whoever it was, somebody talked about gobbling up real estate, and I freaked out because I don't plan to buy and I live in a good space. And so I emailed the board, and what Christopher told me, and I believe it, I do believe it, is he said that's only in there if it gets to be really close to the end of escrow and they only need a couple of lots. That's what he told me.
They can force
Okay,
it.
But they may need a lot more than a couple,
Sorry.
because
Well, what he said was a few, if they were very close to 80 and it was close to escrow. He said they weren't going to go off on a
okay, but it doesn't say that in the contract. That's just a verbal promise.
I'm not defending him. I'm telling you what he wrote back to me.
Okay. And what I want to do is talk about specifically what's in the contract, you know. Paper talks and BS walks.
No,
right?
I'm with
It's
you.
just, there's a contract and what's in here matters. So now if we're close, or if it's a little, or if it, the document says 80 lot purchase required for closing. So,
If I put $200,000 in the first day escrow is open, but normally the escrow would hold on to that money and absolutely nothing would happen to it except that it would go to the seller on closing of escrow. But
right,
in this case, it can be taken by the board and spent in a number of different ways until I have no money left in there toward a purchase price. And at the end of it, if not 80 people are around, I'm just out my 200,000.
correct.
Like the
Good
2000.
deal.
So you're putting money into, you're not putting money into escrow, you're putting money into a buyer transaction fund. It's not into a purchase
It's not
fund.
into an escrow. Okay.
So, and I can point at where that is in the document, but it's, so there's this, it's in section 5E, and it talks about buyer contributions. And we might as well take a quick look at it. So in this thing, it's not a very easy thing to navigate through. So here's funding for buyer transaction expenses, use of rent increases on page 18, and then 5C, contributions by purchasers. So the money that you give is going into this purchaser contribution stuff on page 19. So it's not actually going into an escrow fund per se. It's going into this buyer transaction, it's called transaction expense escrow. It's not a purchase.
Oh, goodness, okay.
So
there's no intention from the beginning that that money is going to be handed over to Biggs in the end at the purchase price?
there is an intention that at the end, if there's $28 million of lot sales, what happens is there's this big pot of money. Some of it will have been spent on things. Some of it goes to pay off Big's $9.4 million note. The rest of it gets split 60-40 in Biggs and the buyer fund. So theoretically, the new buyer fund has some money left over. So the purchasing group has money left over to, I don't know, do whatever they want.
So
Start.
that's assuming everybody's come up with the price that has been determined.
Not everybody, 80 lots. Not everybody.
The last survey, when it said 60% did not want to buy, how does that correspond with the 80 lot figure? I mean, what, do we know what the 60%, huh?
It wasn't, well, first of all, it wasn't 60%. It was 65 votes, no, I don't want to convert, 40 yes, and 5 unsure. I think that's 110 out of about 100, I don't know the exact numbers, but 150, 180, I don't know exactly how many eligible lots there are. Biggs couldn't vote in that survey. Biggs can vote in this one. So the numbers always get fuzzy, but when we get to this probability of closing, I think you'll see that it factors in heavily that there's a lot of people that say they don't want to pursue this.
That actually is a very crazy question that I keep waking up in the middle of the night asking myself. How can a guy that already owns the park, he gets 11, I guess technically I know how he does it because he owns 11 spaces in here, but he gets 11 votes to say, yes, I want you guys to buy it from me, and it just doesn't seem, it seems like his lot should be taken out of the equation.
Just like he can't vote in PBRA elections. I don't think it's legal, really.
I don't know. I can't make any judgment.
Because then he's on both sides of the deal. He's on his side and then saying, yeah.
Okay.
I'm wondering, there's a 9.4 million, and where did they get that number for today's market for land?
Sorry, Biggs' $9.4 million note.
Right,
That's what he bought. He bought the park
I know.
for about 15 million, and he owes 9.4 million on it.
I know, and I'm just wondering, because I've bought land, if, like I have land right now that it's less than half
Yeah.
today.
From 5
Right.
years.
From, yeah. I had it in escrow for a number, 700,000. Today, it's 325,
Right.
and the escrow just fell out.
I bought that projector
So-
4 years ago for $800.
Yeah,
Can I insist on you buying it from me
Yeah.
used for $800?
Yeah.
I can try.
no. So,
No,
so
really,
the-
please.
So you know what I'm saying? It's
But-
like I took a loss. Today's market is half.
Yeah.
I understand.
So how is he not taking a loss when he bought it? He overpaid here. At that time, the market was high. The market's low.
Because that's the deal that was negotiated.
That's what I'm saying. So is there a written estimate on the value of this land?
No.
I honestly don't
A
think
comp?
he wants to sell this. This is insane, and I don't think it's going through, but our biggest fear is that if this bill comes down, right now, they dug a huge trench right by the main sewer, gas, and water lines. If that bill moves, it's because of that trench, and it's already moving because we've got a busted sewer line, we're out of here with nothing. They can condemn the park on us. If he gets the park condemned with, I think it's his goal, he still owns it. Then he comes in with the engineers and, well, you've got an, international, capital of people to put a bunch of condos up or something.
No, this
No, he can't do
that.
this cannot this property cannot be. It's not zoned for that.
It's zoned for mobile home park.
It
Yeah.
can be re-engineered. It could be, look what they did right with the Edgewater Towers.
Well, let's, you know what,
Yeah,
let's all
Anyway,
speculate. Let's,
Yeah.
not really to talk specifically
wondering
about this
if-
document.
I know. I'm just wondering, is there some kind of a comp or some kind of a real estate person?
Not that I know of. That's not the deal that was negotiated.
Okay,
You need
that's
to
what
talk
I'm
to the
wondering.
people that negotiated the deal.
And
So
this
I want
said-
to talk about the document that they signed.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so
Who
next,
actually wrote this, that puts in things and leaves out things and
We
makes
don't
it
know.
so we don't understand it? Who wrote it, Biggs or
No.
the board?
Attorneys.
The attorney for the board.
Lawyers.
well,
And probably Biggs attorneys too.
Which attorney?
Rodriguez.
who actually wrote it? My guess, and this is a pure guess, is it was written primarily by Biggs's attorneys and edited slightly by ours.
it's
No,
not.
I think that's the opposite. I'm pretty sure it was really hammered out mostly by, the
PBRA.
PBRA board and their.
Well, the PBRA board said,
By an attorney, a real estate attorney for the board.
wrote the bulk of this document.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, again, I don't know, so.
Our friends.
uh,
But Chris did say that it's too bad you weren't in on it when they
Well.
figured it out, because apparently they see a few loopholes. in
No.
No, you guys,
Again, let's just,
Yeah,
I'd like
no,
to focus
let's get on with the
on
meeting here.
not what happened or what could happen. This is the document. I'm happy to have another meeting where we discuss all the possibilities, but this one is really about this contract. This is a contract of whether or not we want to ratify it or not.
Right.
So,
That was
Next
Chris's
clause.
statement the other night.
next clause is due diligence period, right? So, oh, sorry, no,
say,
I need to say one other
What,
very
the
important
hillside?
thing about the hillside, yep.
Now,
Yes.
one concept that doesn't seem to be coming across is that the reason why we're paying more than he paid is because the deal includes, the hillside being addressed, which is from whatever, 18 to $60 million. You know what I mean?
Okay, but it doesn't.
But it
Let me
doesn't.
make that very, very, very clear. In section 2, it talks about so in section 2, it talks about a hillside repair. But I can point you to that section of the document. But in section 6E, which is the conditions to closing, it's actually talking about a hillside repair agreement,
Yeah.
which is just a plan to fix the hillside. There's no actual bulldozers, shovels, concrete,
Right,
nothing.
Right, but it's a plan where the city and whoever have committed dollars, right?
Correct.
Yeah, so it's a plan that it's paid for.
It's a
right?
plan
It's not
that
paid
will
for,
be
though.
paid for.
That's not
Right.
paid
The
for.
money
The
is
city
not
hasn't
paid
asked us to
for.
pay for that.
What's that?
Right.
That hillside repair is not paid for.
No,
The city
but-
doesn't have any money.
No, okay, you don't know what the city does and does not have. But the whole point is that the city has to commit, right? The deal doesn't go through if the city doesn't
Correct.
commit to
That's-
what.
That's right.
So my only point that I'm trying to make is the reason why we're paying more for the park is because it includes addressing the hillside. Now, your point
I
is
disagree.
valid that,
It doesn't include addressing the hillside.
Well-
It includes a plan
Yeah.
to address the hillside.
but a financed plan.
No, but no one's.
No, it's not finance, it's commitment,
Yeah.
not finance,
Right,
which
right.
is very different.
Why would that?
I promise to
cost
pay you
more?
Tuesday for a hamburger today, sort of thing. It's not actual, there's no actual hamburger.
Right,
involved
but if you
here.
have a contract with the city that says they're going to do this, and
Yeah, yes, there's a commitment that they'll do something.
A promise,
But
yeah.
I have since 2005 heard no deal without a hillside fix. And now I look at this document and say, there's no hillside fix. There's a promise for a hillside fix. And that's exactly what it says. I'm happy to point it out. It's in section 6E, and we'll get to that when we get to 6. We're still just on 2. Number 4, so due diligence period. This is where we have, due diligence is a normal process where you inspect a property or something, right? And it's, in this case, we have 3 years to do an inspection. The main thing we have to do in those 3 years is pay for all this stuff in the buyer transactions expenses. So our inspection is really time for us to fix the park up and make it nice so we can buy it. And this document, that bold quotes, I didn't add that. That's exactly as it says. As is, where is, and with all faults. And the faults include the hillside, the sewer systems, blah, 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 all of that, right? But as is with that 12-foot trench, or whatever's happening on the day that we get to closing. Funding for buyer transaction expenses. In section 5, it talks about the rent increase of $150 a month. Well, that adds up to about $270,000 a year, right? The buyer transaction expenses, when we get to that, they add up to $9.7 million. That's, 36 years later, $250,000 a year for 36 years gets you to the right 9.7. So money's got to come from somewhere else. The other where it comes from is in section 5C. That's what you were talking about, Justin, is contributions by purchasers. It enables people with money to buy up lots from people who don't have money, quite simply. Conditions to closing, 6. This is probably the biggest and most important and most complex section of the document. It's got 26 sections. I think they ran out of letters. It really does have 6A through 6C, sorry. And I'm going to talk about those in the next page. I'm only going to talk about a few of them because there's so many. You can look at them, but I would ask you to look at section 6 very closely. Seller's covenants. Covenants are commitments on the part of a person in a contract, right? So I promise I will do such and such. So the seller covenants are promises that I promise I will pursue rent increase. Well, that's not a surprise because Biggs has been trying to pursue rent increases all along. One of the things that's been touted as a great benefit to us is now the seller says, hey, I'm going to lift this moratorium on you improving your homes. So you're now allowed to fix your houses up, which I've been preventing in the past. And I swear that's written in there. The moratorium on improvements to property is considered a benefit, and it's something that the seller is given as a great gift to us. I don't really agree with it, but it's there. Buyer's covenants. Now this is where it gets a little blurry to me because normally the seller would be on one side of the deal and the buyer's on the other and they kind of head to head and fighting it out. But a lot of the buyer's covenants are things that it sounds like the seller would want, like, okay, in 14B, I'll support a rent increase. Okay? Or 14C, I will dismiss any challenge to the rent increase. So if some of you don't sign up to this deal, the buyer is going to make sure, if you reject this rent increase, you don't like it, the buyer is going to make their best efforts to stop you from arguing against this rent increase. It would normally be something I think the seller would do. But, and of course the buyer is saying, yes, I'll help stop all the lawsuits. This document is full of things about stopping lawsuits, and I think, the more I read it, the more I thought about it, I think all that Biggs wants to do is stop all the lawsuits. And you'll see when we get into section 6, it's in 6J, 6Y, 6X, it's here in 14E. It's all through the document. Stop the lawsuits, stop the lawsuits, stop the lawsuits. Because Biggs doesn't want to be told what to do. Now, speaking of stopping lawsuits, Exhibit J, the covenant. The covenant is what you're going to be asked to sign if you want to ratify this deal. The covenant, it's called a covenant not to execute and release. And what it says is, I will not sue Biggs for anything he does beyond his limit of insurance, and I also acknowledge that he may not have any insurance at all. So, now, if you think about this, so we have a situation up on the top of the hill now, water main break or sewer, I don't know what it is. Somebody's coming and digging up stuff, and let's say the, rains come tomorrow, landslides, 2 more homes get decommissioned, or whatever the nice term is for wiped out. And you say, well, I think I'm going to sue Biggs for having dug up that hole and not properly shored it up, or whatever he did or didn't do. You've given up that right. You've signed a document that says, well, whatever he does, I can't sue him. Maybe he's got $1 million in insurance, but, fixing that's going to cost tens of millions. So, that's what you're going to be asked to sign to ratify this, is this covenant. Schedule 2C, that's the estimate of all the conversion costs. I'm sorry, I keep mixing up the $9.4 million note and the $9.7 million. It should say $9.7 million of expenses. Those estimates do not include the Coastal Act or the Mellow Act. I will talk you through later on what those $9.7 million of expenses are. But that's stuff you're going to spend, your money, before you buy the park. And your money's at risk if you don't get to closing. Finally, similar to Exhibit J is this Schedule 15E5. It's called the post-closing leasehold percentage. This is where if you're a non-purchasing owner, so you own a leasehold right now, but you choose not to purchase your lot, and then you later, after closing, want to sell your leasehold, you have to do certain things in order to get any of your equity. And if you don't do those things, you lose your equity. For example, if you don't sign the covenant, if you sue Biggs for anything else, etc. And I'll take you through the specifics of those clauses.
Is that amount of money, the equity, your leasehold value, considered to be anything over the recently evaluated value of the home and the lot combined?
It's a very strange, complex formula that's got an example in this PSA, and I went through it 3 times and I don't really understand it. But what I do understand is if you don't behave,
Yeah, I do too.
you lose your equity. So if your lot is, there's an example in here that says if your lot price was $220 and the estimated value is $400 and you sell it for $450 and blah blah blah, there's some adjustments.
Your equity is
I just ask you to look at this. It's right at the very back of the document. There's I think the very last page of the PSA talks through an example. Initial.
They'll add that basically to the price of the lot, the HOA well, if they're in charge, or Biggs well, if you sell it before.
They will do something like this. They'll say, okay, there's an initial lot price of $200,000. The lot sold after closing. The updated lot price, wherever that comes from, is $350. Then blah 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 blah.
And the market value.
I don't know. There's some
When did that?
value calculation in here, and then what happens is that, let's say that value, let's say in this example very simply, your house sells for $400,000 in the year 2017, and your initial price was $200, but there was this profit gap of or margin of $200. That $200 in equity, you would only get it if you complied with certain clauses of this PLP. Otherwise, if you didn't comply with any of them and you sold your house for $400, It all goes basically to the homeowner association.
James, even if you sign all of those, I see some ways in looking at that where that you wouldn't get any equity. So, for instance, it says on the last 2 pages that if the amount you can sell your home with lot for is not as high as the amount they assess at the time your lot to be, then you get nothing.
Correct.
And so you could even go sign away all your rights, and then you still don't get any equity back.
True. So, yep.
We're still not, I'm sorry, just to reiterate this point that she made, we're still not clear on whether this price is based on your structure and the lot, or is it just the lot itself?
There's 3 different
Based on the
things.
structure.
The possessory rights, the
structures don't
house,
work
and
out.
the lot. The possessory rights, the house, and the lot. There are 3
Gotcha,
different
okay, that's
things.
fine.
Possessory rights is an asset.
Yeah, right, like
Yeah.
a leasehold.
So there seem to be 3 assets that they're dealing with here, but I'm not sure if you.
I don't know because it's not in this document, so I haven't assessed it. Sorry.
Yeah.
That's a whole separate thing, the whole assessment, the drive-by appraisal, I don't know.
Yeah.
So, now, you're gonna get a ratification packet soon, right? I don't know if any of you went to Rodriguez's presentation. He talked about it, I've seen it in presentations. The ratification packet, you're gonna be asked to sign the covenant not to execute and release. And if you sign that, you're ratifying this deal, and what happens is you're authorizing the rent increase of $150 a month, $1,800 a year, $90 of which is permanent, no matter what happens. You authorize the board to start spending all this money on conversion costs. You give up legal rights, you have to sign and say, I won't sue Biggs. And you agree to put your money at risk if there's no conversion. So the example you used before, I put 200,000 in so I get more credit, early bird purchase, but then there's no deal at the end, yes, your 200's gone. So, you can sign that form, or you have a choice, there's another form you can sign, which is something from the state of California, an MPROP form that says, no, I don't support the conversion. The deal says, actually, in section 6, one of the conditions to closing is that 2/3 of you have to approve the deal on this MPROP form.
Not only approve it, but say you want to buy.
Yes, correct, thank you. Approve and indicate your intent to purchase. So this is the MPROP form from the state of California. And it says, I filled it in where it says Palisades Bowl Mobile Home Park. But you put in your space number, there's some stuff about the estimated share and the assessed value and blah, blah, blah.
You can leave that blank, right?
Yeah, well, for our purposes, if you want to just say no, you can leave all it blank. Now here we are on page 2. The form asks you to pick one of these boxes. Yes, I support the conversion, but I don't want to buy. But in this deal, 67% of you have to choose one of these. Yes, I support the conversion and I intend to buy either I'll get a bank loan, in section A, or B, I intend to purchase with cash, because I'm just walking around with 200 grand in my pocket, or I think I'm lower income resident and I may need MPROP financing to assist me. Okay, so these are your 3 choices for approving the conversion and intent to purchase. But there's one other one here that's kind of nice. No, I don't support the conversion. So, if this document, not if, since this document says 67% of you must choose one of these, if 33% plus one of you, 34% or more, say no, there's no conversion. It's right, quite simply. If any of you are interested, the forms are in that yellow folder right there.
Good.
Hey,
Well, come on in.
You said if 34%.
I listened to it last night, I just wouldn't listen to it again.
That's scintillating.
You want to dream about it.
34% said no, then what? What's the-
Well, there are a number of conditions to closing in the document, in section 6, which I'm going to start to go through some of them. Section 6 is the one that, remember I said they ran out of letters? Conditions to closing 6A through 6Z, 26 clauses that say these things are all required for closing. And one of them is that 67% of the people have to sign this form and say, yes, I support conversion and I will buy. And it says it right in this document, in section 6, which is about here. That's section 9. It's very hard to navigate, but I've been doing it for weeks. Here they all are. I think this is back to Z. No, we're only up to T. Yeah, here's X, Y, Z. Yeah, so here's Z, 6Z, and 6, blah, 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 blah. Keep going. 3, 4, 5, 6 pages of conditions. And what did I say it was? MPROP 6B. So,
What page is that?
page 19. So it says, so remember that due diligence period, 3 years, actually it's been 5 years, but 67% of the owners indicated their intent to acquire the lot, blah, 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 on the MPROP form. So I got an A in math, actually, and I know that 100% minus 67% is 33%, and if 34% say no, then it's impossible for 67% to say yes, to put it quite simply. So this is a condition to closing. Last night there was an interesting debate where it was proposed that we only had to do some of these things. And I disagree violently with that. This document says all of these things are all conditions precedent to buyers, you know, you have to do A through Z. You can't, you can't just say,
Must be
skip some.
fulfilled to the satisfaction of buyer or waived by buyer in either case.
Yes, or waived. Interesting. No, so now this is tricky. So this is one of those gray areas. Waived by buyer. Those things are speckled through this document, and this is another thing that worries me. Thank you for pointing it out.
Thank you. I just.
We have these conditions, but we also have a group of people who are sort of gung-ho to make this happen. And waiving means they say, well, I don't really care that no one agreed with this. I'm going to go ahead. So it's my personal goal that 51% of this actually say no, because it would be pretty hard in any court or anywhere to
How can
push.
they go ahead? How can they go ahead on it?
They have this
How could they go
little
ahead and sign the ratification when there was a vote in the park and 65 people said no and 40 people said yes? Same way.
By the way, this is a nasty question, but who's counting the votes?
Yeah.
They do that really honestly now. There's always a cross.
Well, we'd have to make sure, though, that they're doing it honestly, not just,
But it was done twice, and so
Yeah.
the second time.
Okay.
but they didn't count that.
In terms of counting the MPROP forms, I'll take personal responsibility for counting those because I've got 10 so far, and I'm hoping to get 80.
James, could we go back to the last page? Just one, I noticed something I didn't know, not that one.
Oh, the form?
No, not the form, the conditions for closing, the first page of that,
What?
of the conditions for closing.
That's on page 19 in the actual purchase.
Oh, the document.
In the PSA.
Yeah. Is there something I just noticed I didn't notice before? At the top, under number 6, it says, no, I've got to find it again. Something about inconsistent, oh yeah. For the purpose of section 6A, all the owners claiming an ownership interest in shall be counted as one voter. If more, and the owners take inconsistent positions regarding any use or action, then that unit will be treated as not voting or taking action.
That's arguing, for example.
Oh, 2 people in the same home. Okay.
That's all that is. That
Okay.
says you can't have,
Yeah, it's all our
you can't
fault.
split a house vote.
Okay.
A house vote.
Okay, I didn't understand that. Yeah.
That's all. A lot has one vote.
Okay.
I usually vote.
What
So,
did you say about 8 or 10? 8 and 10, here those numbers,
I said so far we've had 10 people sign the MPROP form to say no.
One vote, it's one vote per household is what it means.
I'd like to have 80.
You know, we both can't vote.
Anybody want to see?
Yeah, I'm good.
No, we're good.
I mean, you are for it and you guys are against it?
Yeah,
No, just if we disagree,
This is the-
it's only
we
one
thought it was
vote is
7
allowed
Um,
per household.
Oh, okay. Is that? Okay. So, yeah, sorry, last night was 7, tonight 6, I don't know, I shouldn't have done that. So, now, section 6. Section 6 is one of the most important parts of the document, because this is all the conditions to closing. What I'd like to do is talk through what I think are the probable outcomes of each of these sections and the risks associated with them. So the first one, approval of a majority of owners, plus those owners signing this covenant not to execute the lease. So condition 6A says 51% of the residents have to ratify the agreement by signing the covenant. I think the chance of that happening, or probability happening, is pretty low, medium to low. I think once people realize that they're signing a document that waives legal rights, they're going to probably not want to do it. From a risk perspective, I'd say there's not much risk to the seller whatsoever. Huge risk to the buyer. Whenever you give up legal rights, of course, you put yourself at risk. Section 6C, final approval of conversion. This is a big, hairy one. This actually says that in order to get to conversion, so to get to closing, we have to have a conversion approved by all government authorities having jurisdiction. Those are the exact words, and that's a pretty big, expansive description. It's imprecise, but it's huge. All government authorities. So if anyone who comes along from any government body that says, I have an interest in this conversion, they could either approve it or not approve it. And right now, we cannot say exactly who they are, right? But because new government restrictions could be imposed tomorrow, right? We don't know what they are, but we have a general idea. Anyway, I think the probability of this occurring is extremely low, because conversion, as you recall from a year ago, in the appellate court decision, conversion equals development. Development requires approval from the Coastal Commission, and it also requires compliance with the Mellow Act.
And the plan does not comply with the Mellow Act, so it'd be the plan does not comply with the Mellow Act, so it would be rejected if LA prevails in the Supreme Court, which I think they will.
I believe that's true, and that's another important thing. We have a pending Supreme Court case. I don't know why we're even talking about this, why there's a Supreme Court case pending. But right now, neither.
Doesn't the Mellow Act come into effect when you have residents that are displaced?
Yes.
That's not the decision, though, of the court.
Yeah, no one's being displaced.
They would be displaced if they couldn't afford to purchase. They would lose their affordable housing, and their houses bought out from under them, so we reached the magic 80 lots at closing.
If they couldn't afford to purchase, they would continue renting, right?
Not if their lots were sold, so we could get to the magic 80.
Joey, it is a decision, though, of the appellate court that it does apply. So unless the Supreme Court overthrows that, I believe I sent you the...
It only applies if there are people that are being displaced.
That's not what the court said. They said, yeah.
Well, except units, if affordable units are
Correct.
being taken away, and if my lot now costs $400,000, it's not exactly affordable as it was.
Including for residents in the future, not just affordable for us, but yeah.
It's affordable housing units, not necessarily people are kicked out of their homes.
And if you waive your rights to that kind of thing, then you lose all your equity, it's taken away from you.
We're not talking about that, we're just
Right.
talking about the Mellow Act.
So, but you know, in all of these things, everyone's got a view, and I respect your view, it may be different than mine. What I'm going to ask all of you to do is do your own assessment of risks, and actually do that on the next page. And I do a lot of work in risk and risk analysis, risk assessment. I work for the chief operating officer of the risk department of one of the largest banks in the world, and banks are pretty good at doing risk. And so what I'll do in the next page is talk through a simple mechanism that you can use to assess risk and probability of an outcome. And you could apply your own judgment about whether or not the Mellow Act would apply and factor it into your own assessment. And I'd encourage everyone to do the same. So, in my opinion, the risks here are high because, to the buyer are high because we pay all the conversion costs, whatever they may be. and we pay them before closing. And that's just very, very important to understand. We pay or fund, and others will argue that yes, well, Biggs pays, he doesn't really pay, he gets his back end take reduced. If you go through the section of the purchase price and go through section 2C in the exhibits, you'll understand how there's some adjustments to how much Biggs gets paid. I had just an aneurysm before I could figure it out, but it was very complicated. Sorry. Apologies. Now, I think it's very, this final improvement is very low risk to seller. The reason is because the seller, Biggs, doesn't put any money at risk, he doesn't put any capital at risk. He waits to see, hey, if there's a conversion, great, I can get to closing. If there's no conversion, thanks.
You can't sue me anymore.
Right. Now, I told you that this man is very unhappy about lawsuits. 6J, 6K, 6X, as well as the Exhibit J and other places all talk about dismissal of lawsuits. Now, the probability that all the lawsuits are going to be dismissed before we get to closing, I think is pretty low. I don't think we're going to dismiss the failure to maintain suit. There was a discussion last night about, hey, it doesn't have to be, these don't have to be dismissed on day one, whatever day one is. I think we're in day 45 of our ratification period now, or no, sorry, 35. I think, what was it, 18 months from the effective date, so 18 months from October 1st, all lawsuits must be dismissed. Yeah?
At the meeting that the PDRA had 2 Mondays ago, I flipped out when I saw that in the PSA because I felt as if we had been encouraged to join the failure to maintain, and then they were asking us to pull up, which meant we would owe court costs, etc. What they said to me then, what Rodrigue said, and I wish he could change the language, he says he can't change anything, but he said dismissal doesn't mean we can't end the suit that we're in.
Correct.
And so so my reading then of what that means is that we just give up our right to ever sue him again for failure to maintain.
Correct.
And the Bellinger is also going to settle, so it's not like we inherit Bellinger, it just means we can't sue him again, which is bad, but it's not as bad as we can't sue again and we don't get what we're going to get now and we would have to pay the lawyer costs.
So shame on me, this summary should say, lawsuits dismissed, no new suits.
Yeah, it's badly written in the PSA, and
no,
you know.
It's very well written if you're the seller.
Well, but and I don't understand why they can't change the wording because it says very clearly to me we're supposed to dismiss it, and I'm like, he said something about, well, you don't understand legal jargon, that means you can still get your settlement. I was like, no. You know.
I would agree that you could settle. I know that the document says they all have to be settled, closed, dismissed within 18 months.
Right.
So.
And I believe we're on track to have that happen.
Then that's fine. Okay, so if you're doing your own risk assessment, which I'll take you through in the next page, you'd call that probability very high, that they're all going to be dismissed. That's fine. I think it's low. And that there'll be no more lawsuits. So then the next clause, and there's many, and this, by the way, doesn't talk about the hillside. The MPROP financing and this 8D4, the closing payment. So 67% of the residents, you already saw that MPROP form, 67% of the residents have to sign the MPROP form, and you're signing a government form, which means, you know, hand on heart, perjury and all that, that says, I intend to purchase, I approve the conversion, and I intend to purchase. And related to this 6B is this 8D4, the closing payment. That's the mysterious $28,741,000 something. I can't figure out for the life of me where that number 28 million comes from, but it's there. But we're supposed to make this payment to Biggs at closing. Now, when I look at these two things in combination, 67% of the residents saying, yes, I intend to purchase, and here's my financing mechanism. Some of them might say, I think I'm low income, so please give me MPROP financing. But the reality is, to get to closing, we need the closing payment, right? So all the stars have to align. Everything has to be perfect. We could do every single thing except we don't just quite have the closing payment. We're close. We're almost there. We got 26,549,000, not 28,741,000. That's it. No deal. There's no closing. Right? All the conditions are precedent. Now again, you know, probably people can in contracts waive things or flex. And it's up to you to determine how much you know, how confident do you feel like, are we going to get there? Are we going to get close? We're never going to get close. And do your own risk assessment of what you think is going to happen. What are the possible outcomes? So, but I do know if 33% of the residents say no, we shouldn't get to closing, except, as Justin found, we could waive that clause. It's all a bit fuzzy, right? Anyway, take a look at section 6, go through all the conditions, and decide if you think we'll get there. Now, what I'd like to encourage all of you to do is your own risk analysis, risk assessment, probability, prediction, to say, what do I think the chances are we're going to get there? I just took those 4 clauses, and let's say you take 4 conditions of closing that have to occur. And I created a little table of extremely high probability of yes to extremely low, ranging from 90, 70, 50, 30, 10%. Yeah? And I assign a probability to each of these things. Now, the way independent events works in probability calculations is we multiply the probabilities to come up with the end probability, right?
And do you think the first one's accurate, that it has a 50-50 chance by majority of owners?
That's just an example. You could put any number in here.
Oh, I see. I think it's much lower.
He's showing you how it's done.
Okay, I
Put in
Formula.
99% on all of these if you want.
Okay.
If you think this is almost a dead certain happy.
No, I think the first one's much lower than 50%.
And actually on the previous page, I said it was medium to low.
Yeah.
I think it's lower too, but I didn't want to be cruel in my analysis, so I had to give some room here. So let's say coin toss, 50-50. Half the people, we get to that majority of owners. The next thing, final approval of conversion. That's all government authorities approving everything. Mellow Act, Coastal Act, I don't know, do they apply? Let's see. I think it's extremely low. All lawsuits dismissed? Okay, we've heard good argument, maybe that's pretty high. Maybe in 18 months all lawsuits will be dismissed and there'll be no more new lawsuits. Okay, maybe not. And finally, MPROP financing and the closing payment. That we come up with the $28 million closing payment. If you multiply these probabilities out, 50% times 10 times 30 times 30, comes up to less than 0.5%. Or if you do it using fractions, it's a 9 in 2,000 chance that we get to closing. Now, if you 2 hours down the road go to Las Vegas and bet 9 in 2,000 chance, you want a pretty big payoff. But again, this is my opinion, but this is how the math works, right? I'd ask you to do the same. Are you looking for the PSA side?
Yeah.
So, I encourage all of you to take the PSA, look at clauses A through Z, think about the chance of us getting through all of them, and think about the pathway to closing, and think about if you want to put your money into a deal that's at risk if you don't get to closing. So do your own math. Now I said here, do the math here, if you assign all 4 of these events as extremely high, 90%, you still only get to a 65% chance of a positive outcome. So just go into it with eyes wide open. These are, as you saw before, it's 6A, 6X, 6 blah, blah, blah. It doesn't include 6E, I think, the hillside repair agreement. That's another big uncertainty. The fact that the city of LA, that's essentially bankrupt and laying off school teachers and closing libraries, is gonna fund this hillside fix. Some people believe they will. You need to make your own assessment. Sure.
You're gonna talk about the other risks that,
Yep.
if we don't die.
Yep, I will.
Okay, because that really seems like bottom line to me.
Okay, no, I will come to that soon. Now, I do want to talk before about the other risk. I want to talk about the $9.7 million you're going to be asked to spend before you get to closing. So in section 6, it talks about a bunch of stuff like escrow and conversion costs, Title 25 repairs, the hillside repair agreement, no hillside repair. And there's corresponding tables in Schedule 2C at the back of the PSA that have these estimates for all these costs. And I took the little tables and I recreated them in Excel and I added them all up. And for example, escrow due diligence costs. We estimate we're going to spend $385,000 on stuff to get, I don't know, I'll skip that one because it's not that interesting. Let's jump down to Title 25 repairs. Title 25 says, in order for you to sell a piece of property, it has to be of a certain standard, right? You can't buy a defective good. So Title 25 says the electrical has to be of a certain standard, the water, the gas, the electric, the roadways, etc. all have to be of an approved standard. What we have in this document is an agreement where we're saying we're going to make all these Title 25 repairs to the property at our expense. So basically, we know it's substandard. It's not even good enough to be sold as is. So we'll spend $250,000 to upgrade the water, sewer, electric, gas, roadways, etc. So we'd be in compliance with the law. I find that interesting, that I as the buyer have to pay to fix up the good that I'm buying. Somebody last night told me a story saying, my car broke down because the transmission went. And boy, if I could have made the buyer pay to fix the transmission, I could have charged him more for the car. I said, yeah, that's exactly how this works. Now, the hillside repair agreement. This is a little bigger price tag, $3.95 million. And it's very important that it's an agreement. It's not an actual hillside repair. And it's very clear. It's a little fuzzy in the document because sometimes you read in section 2C, it talks about hillside repair. And in other parts of the document, it talks about hillside repair. But in the actual condition to closing, it says very clearly it's a hillside repair agreement. In section 2C, where the money is, it actually calls it a hillside repair, but the detail of section 2C doesn't say anything about a repair. And I think that's worth looking at. Section 2C, so there's these tables at the bottom of the document, not the bottom, but way at the back, where they summarize, so here we are in Schedule 2C.
What page is that?
It's not a page.
There's no page.
Well, it's about a page 113 without a page number, so it's pretty close to the back.
Okay, thank you.
And it's the pages with the tables in them. So let's find the one that says hillside repair, and we'll actually look at it, Title 25 repairs, hillside repairs. So when I look at these things, none of these are actual repairs. Here's a contractor bidding to say, I'll do this job. Change orders, contingency, blah, blah, blah. Bond attorney. This is so we can get funding from the city or that sort of thing. There's no like earth moving equipment, shovels, engineering work. This is a hillside repair agreement. So this is basically, we spend $3 million to get a fixed bid from a contractor who says, I promise I will fix the hill per this quote for this amount of money. And then we, on the other hand, go off and talk to the city and with a bond attorney saying, hey, we have a bid to fix the hillside for, I don't know, 25 million, 40 million, 60 million, whatever it is. Can you raise money from the people of, you know, the world, basically, with a bond issuance, that we'll pay a bond attorney to convince the city of LA to get financing to do this. Then we get to closing, then we have this commitment. The city of LA says, yes, we'll raise the $40 million. The contractor said, yes, I have a firm commitment that I'll deliver the work for the $40 million. There's no actual hillside fix.
Can I ask, what's pre-closing? One that says buyers 10%, sellers 90%.
This is all the weird adjustment stuff.
Okay, I just, because one way it looks like we'd be into it for 10% of that, not, did they go clear across?
This is the thing that, you know, just gave me a headache trying to figure
All
out.
right.
So when you get your ratification packet, this is a very good question to ask. Please explain these tables. Why are some of the numbers filled in? Why are some of them blank? The only ones that are filled in are the estimated costs, and the estimated costs are what the buyer is going to spend.
Okay.
And from my understanding, we make adjustments at some point that if we start to spend more, so the one example here, we estimated the bond attorney would cost $100,000, right? It actually cost $105,000, so it's $5,000 over. Now we have an adjustment, a pre-closing adjustment that says the buyer pays 65% of this $5,000.
Oh, okay, that's enough.
The seller pays 35% of it. Then there's post-closing adjustments, blah, blah, blah. Now, what's unambiguous is the buyer pays 100% of 100,000. The buyer pays 100% of 3 million, right? So the seller doesn't pay anything until we surpass these estimates. Yeah? So this document has 7 tables like this that add up to $9.7 million. Yeah?
I like it too, where it says it has to withstand a 100-year storm, including.
Yeah? Well, that's why the contractor bid cost $3 million, because you're asking someone, give me a firm contractual bid, a commitment that you're gonna fix this hillside, right?
And it's gonna last us.
And then they're gonna put a price on it, and they're gonna build a huge amount of contingency in it, because they don't know what's up there. Anyway, the important thing is, we don't have a hillside repair. Even though it says hillside repairs, it's not, it's a hillside repair agreement. So I find this section should be renamed, but it is what it is, yeah.
In the little paragraph below though, doesn't it say that we're capped out at 8 million?
Right, that's for the actual repair.
Right, so the part purchase we would pay would be 8 million?
Right.
For a hill?
So remember that mysterious $28,741,000 I talked about? Okay. Biggs has a note of $9.4 million. So we know that closing payment, the total lot sales is $28 million. So let's round some numbers off. $28 million in lot sales. Pay off Biggs's note of $9 million. That leaves $19 million. The conversion costs that we estimated were 9.7, call that 10, right? So I have 19 left. Now I spent 10 on conversion costs. I've got 9 left. Hey, I can pay my $8 million share of the hillside fix with that $9 million I have left over. That's how that could work.
I thought he got 60% of that last $9 million.
He gets 60% of the, yeah, see, that's a bit fuzzy for me. I don't know. I don't know. So I know we pay off Biggs's $9.4 million note, and then I know we pay buyer transaction expenses. What I don't know is how this $8 million commitment gets handled after closing, because there's no hillside repair before closing, it's only after closing. So,
Really? What if it costs a lot?
Now I can read this and read this and read this again, and I'll figure it out.
I'm sorry, I'm sorry. The hillside gets fixed after you purchase the park.
Correct.
Maybe.
And the,
Has anybody figured out what per lot in 150 divided by 28 million? Just simple, I don't have a calculator, what's it make it per lot? Even if they're all exactly the same?
Yeah,
Is there enough lots to produce?
There is.
Okay.
There is, yes. But I haven't figured out what it is, but I can do it.
Yeah, but that's, if you took 150 divided, all of them, no ocean lot, everything from a cracker box to the biggest lot we have, divide that by 150, and what does it come per lot?
160.
Sorry? Somebody see how to math?
28 million divided by 150
Yeah.
is 186,666.
There you go.
So that's sort of tough when you only have, what, 20 ocean lots at 300,000, the rest of them are 90, it'd be pretty tough to.
Well, I don't know what the whole lot, none of those
Are
prices
they
are in
having
this
an
document.
appraisal
Yeah.
come?
I'm just curious.
The spread is from 90,000.
He's already been here.
to 270.
Right.
They
That's
say,
what I
we
heard.
haven't seen anything.
And it must add up to 28,741,000 minimum. I don't know how it's gonna work, yeah?
Just a comment, I think you misunderstood.
Before we get to closing, we have to do all this, right? Conditions to closing means you must do these things before closing, doesn't it?
And that comes to 9.7
No,
million?
not all of it. For example, the hillside repair, that can be, the most likely scenario there is that there would be, not that we'd have to have 3 million cash in hand, that there'd have to be a deal in place with the city where they set up a tax assessment district and spread it out over whatever it is, 15 years.
No, the document says that there must be a legally binding agreement that obliges all parties to execute. It says, not the city's doing a special tax assessment, it says that you have binding agreements that require people to execute.
Right, but the amount of money that's estimated isn't cash that needs to be raised from lot sales prior to closing.
Where does it come from then?
I
Who
think
pays,
the only way it would work.
who pays 9.7? If you don't do these things, you don't close. I mean, if you can read the document differently, I think it's pretty clear that we need to bring, we can't buy the property if it's not compliant with Title 25, for example.
No, I agree with the top 3 columns, the hillside repair. Again, it's a non-starter. I mean, there's no way that lots are gonna sell to raise that money to fix the hill. I don't think having the cash at closing to pay for that is what the contract
But this
says.
isn't cash at closing, these are expenses we incur in order to get up to closing, right? This is like the average Joe owns a regular house and says, I think before I sell my house, I better fix the leaky faucet, paint the bathroom, fix the roof. I mean, right, that's all this stuff is, fixing the property up for sale.
But where's the $9 million that you're talking about?
385 plus 521 plus 246 plus 3.9 million plus 1.34 million
That we're gonna spend.
plus 1.75 plus and this 1.5 million adds up to $9.739 million. It's in Schedule 2C. You have the document in your hand right there. Turn it back to the document, start looking at Schedule 2C. Add up all the numbers. Unfortunately, the document didn't do that, so I did it. I said, okay, let's add up the numbers. Where's my PSA estimates? Little Excel sheet I did. So, there's tables in there, and they unfortunately are tables, not, sorry?
I've just mumbled that we should number those pages that are in the appendix.
So,
that we can find
I went ahead and went into that section 2C, and I copied down every single thing that was in there. So let's just take, I don't know, let's take a big one, like resident relocation. That's an interesting one, that's kind of boring. Infrastructure repairs. No, it is.
if you're relocated.
So infrastructure repairs, section 2C5. So in the document, section 2C5, we have this table. Where is it? Hillside repairs, run cliff repairs. So each one of these has a table. Infrastructure repairs, resident relocation, pricing methodology example.
That's for due diligence.
So you took the totals from all those and put them in the...
Sorry?
You took the totals from those and put them in the spreadsheet?
I just copied those numbers into this. And infrastructure repairs, for example, says, we're gonna spend, before we buy the property, $1 million to upgrade the water system, $1 $250,000 to fix the sewer system, $90,000 to upgrade the electrical grid, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, all adding up to $1.745 million. I did all of those tables, and I added them all up to the top to $9.73 million. This is money we spend before we buy.
Have we got a copy of that in the blue thing you gave us?
It's in the PSA.
Oh, good. Oh, this is all in that detail, within that PSA. I'd love to have a
Yeah,
copy of
it's just that in the document itself, they haven't done the courtesy of adding up the numbers for it. I found this a little disturbing. It's like, here's the estimates, we won't tell you what the total is. So I had to do that, because I thought, well, gee, I'd like to know what all these estimated costs are, because this is the stuff we're gonna be spending money on. So here's infrastructure repairs, right? Blah, 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 no total. They have little totals for all the little adjustments.
Is this place ever been surveyed?
I don't know.
All right,
So, I took all those numbers.
So this is more,
What? Sorry.
can you go down to the bottom? I just want to see your green highlighted numbers that you have.
Like
So you go down, okay, so that's, go, okay, so it's 115, then the next one is how much? You go, keep going up, 1745, 150.
Okay, here, I can just collapse them all.
Oh, gosh.
So,
And again, those
section 2C, 1, 2, 3, 4,
Yeah,
5,
okay,
6,
I see.
7.
It's the big ones, front cliff infrastructure.
That's the
Those are ones in the million, the big money ones are down
Yeah.
there.
Right.
4, 5, 6, yeah, okay.
Usually when you buy a property, you deduct all these things, and
Yeah.
that's your price you pay.
Right.
The owner, whoever's selling it,
Does all this.
does all this before you buy the property.
Right.
normally.
Not the buyer.
Right.
So
This is a
this
strange
is a little
transaction.
backwards.
Well, you know, when you were talking about the fact that the property's worth a lot less,
Yeah.
he also is getting a huge gift in the settlement of these lawsuits right now that should make him a lot more amenable about a price. You know,
Oh,
the
yeah,
fact that these
he-
suits are going away this
No.
month, basically.
Right. And
But
now,
so that yes, isn't it the usual when you buy a property?
I don't know.
Usually
but I
you
just
go
find
in,
this unusual.
you have an inspection, you have people, geologists, this, that, the other, and they give you the estimates of things that are wrong with the property. And then you, the buyer, presents those estimates and you say, well, here's the
I
things
want
that
it.
are wrong,
Right.
this should be deducted from my offer.
A normal
That's a
house
normal,
purchase,
that's
do
how
an
you
inspection.
normally
Right.
do a buy.
And you say, the home inspection, you say, I think the house needs a new roof.
Yes.
Knock 5,000 off the price.
And you get an estimate and you present
But
it.
the flip side of that is, and I'm not agreeing with this, but this is the reason that he is offering it to us at the price that he's offering it to us rather than what he wanted, which was like 25 million or whatever it is that he wanted when he came in here guns ablazing 6 years ago.
Right.
No, it's 6 years.
Well, yeah, I understand. I'm just saying, you know, the people that hammered this out aren't idiots.
Well,
They're just,
and it could also to the career.
I don't want to
look-
charge
right.
all
You
of
have
you
to look at the
$1,000
current
to come to
market.
this presentation, but I decided.
I know, but, you know,
You
I
always
just
get what you
don't,
want.
but, you know, I mean, they're not stupid,
No, but,
But,
so in that 9.7 million, that's conditions to closing. That's money we have to spend to upgrade the property in order to get to closing. I do find some of these a bit shocking. The resident relocation, which I said wasn't interesting, it actually is interesting, because the document in section 6H, which is a condition to closing, describes it, right? But then in the schedule, it also says, hey, anything that comes about as a consequence of future slides, we're paying for. So the day after we ratify, this isn't even after closing, right? You ratify, and there's a slide, and someone else has to be relocated, you pay. Yeah.
And after if we ratify, like this, what's going on right now,
right?
that would then become our bill or
That's,
not?
that's the thing I was saying earlier, is that operation expense, or is that
Oh,
upgrading infrastructure, right? Is that one of these things, like, is it a Title 25 repair for water and sewer? Is it, I don't know. Is it, or is it an infrastructure repair like this? No. Well, infrastructure is enhancing the saleable lots. I suppose removing a 12-foot trench would enhance the sale of your lot, but.
Is there any kind of, is there any kind of insurance plan that,
Not in this document. This is a purchase and sale agreement. I have
right,
no
I mean, I
idea.
just wonder if, you know, worst case scenario and
I would assume the buyer would have made provisions on day one of taking possession of the property. They should be insured, but I don't know. So, encourage you all to look very carefully at section 6 and the corresponding schedules and understand if you want to spend your $9.7 million on this. Now, conscious of all your time, how the deal is funded. The deal is funded either with your money or by attracting other people's money. First, if you ratify, 51% of the people sign that covenant not to execute and release, triggers a rent increase. That rent increase only generates about $250,000 a year. But the conversion cost that we just went through, those add up to $9.7 million. So $250,000 a year, it takes a while to get to $9.7 million, about 36 years. So we have to get more money faster. What do? Well, we need to fund about $3 million a year, every year for 3 years. And it ain't coming from this rent increase. The only place it can come from is contributions by purchasers. And the document says that the buyer can solicit non-refundable purchaser contributions. Now, if we all said, yeah, this is a great idea, 150 units, it would be 20 grand a year, right? But I don't know if everyone wants to do this. And if not everyone wants to do this, of course, the proportionate share increases. If you don't want to buy, clause 5C in this document says the buyer can solicit interest from prospective purchasers. So other people might want to buy, as long as they follow what's outlined in clause 14H. There's no time constraints on this. I don't know about this people saying it's 2 years after closing. I can't find a single thing that says when this can or cannot happen. If someone can find it, happy to stand corrected, but I don't see any date parameters that say 2 years after closing, the buyer can solicit prospective purchasers. There's another clause in the document that says we have to have 80 lots to get into closing, 80 lot sales. So let's say we've got 30 enthusiastic lot purchasers. There's 50 other attractive lots. It's possible that other purchasers could buy them.
I have a question, and it's probably not for you. With this thing about, the gobble up thing, or even if it is just a few people, what legal rights does a person have who owns the lot, and then they say, well, we're at 76 and we're gonna buy your lot? What legal rights would I have if it came to that and somebody, and they said, well, Colleen, you're not gonna buy your lot and you have a nice ocean view, so we're gonna sell it because we need the money. What legal rights do I have?
I have no idea. Ask your attorney.
I'm asking Ivan, because he's an
It's still
attorney.
under the Mobile Home Residency Act. I mean, I'd imagine you could have a different owner, and you'd still have the same rights as the tenant. But you'd also have the same contractual rights provided for in the PSA, because any owner who bought your lot would be subject to the agreement here. In other words, they couldn't, they'd have to keep the rent control provisions that are in the PSA.
They could be enticed to buy your lot, but then they wouldn't be able to live on it because you live on it.
Correct, I don't know why anyone would do that.
Does Ellis
Doesn't make
apply, though? Does the Ellis apply to mobile home lots before, now, or does it apply after conversion? Because with Ellis, if the purchaser wants to move in, your lease is no longer in effect. They just have to pay you X number of months or whatever the maximum amount is agreed under the terms and move you out. Somebody better check Ellis on this to check your rights.
What would they have to pay for your lot? Would that be what they already assessed it at?
Well, I'm assuming
There's a
if you
minimum
didn't
lot
sign
price.
anything, if you didn't agree to any of the conditions, so you had 0 PLP, they'd owe you jack shit.
Yep. So speaking of
Well, I don't be
PLP,
finding any, but I don't know.
if non-purchasing owners, so you, Colleen, as an example, want to sell your unit, you can collect some equity depending upon how you comply with the PLP.
You might be able to.
Right.
Well, you have two, you can sell up until it closes, what I've been told. You can sell and get
You could
whatever
sell it as a
you-
leasehold right now.
Right, and up until closing, and so,
Right.
it's like I said at the meeting 2 Mondays ago, it's a forced gentrification, but that is, if it goes through, that's the only way to escape with anything.
But then don't you
So
lose all of your equity if you haven't signed
No,
one?
no, you could sell
No.
your leasehold.
Until it closes, you keep your equity,
So
but
the
you have to
clauses do
leave.
not apply
Forced
until
gentrification.
it closes.
Right.
If you stay, then you lose your, if you stay past closing, then, and you haven't signed anything for the PLP, you lose it.
So
That's
this,
where
this,
Mel might
this
come in.
PLP is post-closing leasehold percentage, yeah?
Yes, sir.
So, let's talk a little bit about that. Exhibit J is the covenant, I already talked about that. And the PLP, both of these actually force you to choose between your rights or your equity. You have a right to demand that an owner maintain a property, right? So you can sue for failure to maintain, unless of course you sign away your right in a covenant that says, I won't sue. Now to ratify, 51% of the residents have to sign away their rights to sue. So you've made a choice between right and equity, right there. You've chosen to give up a right. But let's say you don't want to ratify this deal. You don't want to sign the covenant. Maybe you don't want to, or you can't afford to buy, and I think there's going to be a lot of people in this position that probably like to buy but can't afford to. And maybe you want to sell your leasehold at a later date. If we get to closing, you have to go through you have these choices. You have to either sign the ratification that says I won't sue, or you lose 25% of your equity. You sign the map waiver, this one's not so contentious. Sign it or lose 15% of your equity. Sign the MPROP intent to acquire your lot. Now this one's puzzling because in this example I said you don't want to convert, you don't agree, I don't want to buy. Now you're forcing me to sign a form that I'm going to submit to the government that says I do want to buy, because if I don't, I lose 15% of my equity. It feels like a little bit of a threat. You have to sign a support statement for the rent increase. Well, wait a minute, I didn't want a rent increase. Now I have to endorse a rent increase, and if I don't do it, I lose another 15% of my equity. And finally, I have to dismiss my suit within 18 months and not sue anything for anyone else. There's another 30% down. So choose between your rights and your equity. And I find this is probably, well, besides spending all the money to fix up the good that we're not sure we want to buy, then the fact that we lose rights is also troubling.
James, is there any place where they actually say when that PLP, when this will become effective? Colleen thinks it is until after closing.
It's specifically on the day of closing,
Of the closing of the whole escrow when they have the park.
when we close.
Okay.
So 3 years minimum,
No,
5
not
years
3 years
maximum.
minimum. You could close this deal in 6 weeks.
They said 3 years escrow.
You have a due diligence period,
Yeah.
maximum 3 years, not minimum.
What? They said 5 maybe.
No, I think,
Maximum, sorry, yes. The due diligence period is 3 years plus 4 possible extensions of 6 months each.
right.
So the maximum is 5 years. But, hey, if 85 people came up with the cash in, Christmas lotto winnings, and in January they said, let's do this, we could close in January, theoretically. Now you'd have to rush through all those upgrades and blah, 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 and hurry up, spend that $9.7 million. But yeah, theoretically,
Except for the hillside has to be fixed.
the agreement would have to be in place, yes. So I don't think we could get to closing.
Only the
Agreement.
yeah.
So I think realistically, you're right, the earliest we could actually get to closing would probably be 18 months. Because you'd have to do all of those infrastructure repairs, the Title 25, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. That would take a while. So this 15E5, very, very back of the document, that's the one I showed you, the little the example where we were trying to calculate this, you know, you had your initial lot price and blah, blah, blah. It's all worded in the document as, hey, look, you can earn equity, just
by lying. Number 3 is actually a lie. They're telling you to lie to a state agency because.
Well,
Yeah.
no, if you have an intent to acquire, you're not lying.
Right, but the people they're asking to sign it who want to keep their equity are people who don't buy, who don't purchase their lot. So they're asking those people to say they do want to buy their lot or you lose your equity.
Well, you could say, I'd like to acquire, but I don't have the money, I'm low income, right? I mean, but if you don't want to, yes, you're perjuring yourself
Yeah.
on a government document, which is not a good idea. But. So, now, your question. So I've talked about the risk of the deal, but you know, in life we choose between, you know, A or B. What are we going to do? We're going to, you know, I don't know, go out or stay in. Are we going to drive or walk? We're going to make decisions all day long. So what are the risks? Am I going to buy or am I going to not buy? If I don't go through this deal, I've heard there's risks of bankruptcy. I can't sell my home. The rents will continue to increase. My opinion, my assessment of these risks, the risk of bankruptcy, I don't think is something to be afraid of. I think that Biggs is a business person who's got multiple and varied interests. I think he, like many sort of, I don't want to call him a small business owner, but he's not managing necessarily like a professional corporation, that he's intermingled his business interests. He's cross-funded some of his activities. I think it would be very hard for him to declare this individual operation of Palisades Bowl is bankrupt and completely independent from all of my other operations. I think if Biggs were to declare bankruptcy, we'd be able to pierce the corporate veil, which says, actually, you know, you've co-funded and commingled funds for a long time for all of your investment interests. It's one big Biggs corporation. It's not this part and that part.
Who holds his note?
Don't know.
Don't know. Well, because wouldn't they take over what it is? Because they're not.
Well, I believe if I held a $9.4 million note and someone just declared bankruptcy, I'd say, pay me first. Or I'd say, wait a minute, you have an income-producing asset. I would probably force him into liquidation to say, someone else take over this income-producing asset. Bankruptcy courts tend to unwind transactions and tend to have them continue to operate as ongoing concerns if possible. There's also a whole bunch of complications around park closure, which I'll talk about on the next page.
James, also in the failure to maintain lawsuit in the settlement, Biggs has agreed that he's not going to close the park and he's not going to declare bankruptcy. And our attorney, James Allen, said point blank, Biggs is not going to declare bankruptcy.
Okay. I'm not party to that suit, and I haven't seen the piece of paper.
If I can
We'll be hearing more
I see
this
that
week.
he's playing both sides here. He's working this deal as hard as he can. He's getting in a
Yeah, I
lawsuit
mean, this
with
is
his
some
bank.
deal he's got.
He's not stupid.
No.
And we haven't seen that settlement agreement, and that would have to
But-
be in writing as part of it.
That's true, but we should find out about it very soon.
I've heard the same thing. I've gotten calls and they're telling me that.
Yeah.
He's not gonna close the park. He's not gonna.
Right.
But it needs to be in writing.
Yes.
Yeah, of course, I agree, but we should find that real soon. Yeah.
There's a meeting next Wednesday,
Yeah.
because we haven't had enough of those.
So there's a risk of the supposed risk of the inability to sell your home or your leasehold. I think there's been plenty of home sales recently. There was a period a couple of years ago where they all stopped, but it started again. I think prices are depressed because there's risk associated with what I call a resident forced conversion. I don't think this is a majority resident approved conversion yet. There's the risk of continued rent increases. Well, LA rent stabilization ordinance is what, 30 plus, 40 years old? I don't know, it's alive and well.
It pops up on the ballot and they get close and the year following that it loses by a higher margin. I mean, I've heard the argument that, you know, it won't be overdone, but I've followed it over the past 4 years and, you know, it's won by a larger vote the last time I did it.
And the courts have consistently ruled rent control is legal, including a major federal court decision Guggenheim versus Goleta, and the U.S. Supreme Court refused to review it. So it's a law of the land that rent control is legal.
Yep. So, but all of these things, you all have your own opinion, assign your own probabilities of, do I think it's a high probability that Biggs is declared bankruptcy or not? Right? And so compare the probable outcomes of these things against the outcome of the other, which is the, are we going to get to closing? Risk of park closure. We've heard that, Biggs will just close the park. Well, can't just close the park. It's LA Municipal Code Section 4709, 1704, 1902, blah, blah, blah. Please feel free to do your own research on this, but there's a lot of stuff out there that says you can't just close a mobile home park. You have to file an impact assessment report. You have to understand the availability of affordable housing to replace the displaced residents. You have to have a dispute resolution process, etc. This is not going to happen overnight. I don't think it's going to happen at all. I think Biggs would more likely just say, let me just get the heck out of this and pay off as much of my $9.4 million note as I can. But just my opinion. Again, you all need to look at these things and say, is this real? Is this risk possible? Yeah?
I'll point out too, the Mello Act gives even stronger protection for park closure. The court ruled that it applies to park conversion, but for park closure, it's even much stronger. As Joey said, you can't take away residential units. In fact, it says a residential unit cannot be replaced by non-residential, point blank in there. Yeah.
So you missed the biggest risk, and that's the hillside, living with the continued hillside, right?
Right.
Because for anything the conversion is the vehicle to address the hillside. And if nothing were to be done, then what's your plan for that?
My plan?
Yeah.
I bought with the hillside risk. I accepted that risk when I bought. I have no plan. I accept it. I knew it was there. I bought in a tsunami inundation zone. I
This
have
is
no
a
plan.
slide zone.
If there's a tsunami, I don't know, my plan is to swim.
Well, that's why we pay, that's why we pay whatever instead of 10 million.
Well, also,
You're not risking $10 million.
I didn't
For a
buy
house in
right next to the
Palisades, that's why we
hillside.
live here instead of up there.
So someone else probably has a higher risk than I do. I live close to the pool. It's gonna be a really big landslide that'll come all the way down there. So no, I accepted that risk. Like I say, we all do our risk assessment, and I factored that into the purchase.
And we would wind it, if we had no agreement, I don't know what I'm trying to say, if we could buy this without just the straight paying off its debts, we'd wind up paying for the whole fix anyway, or having to arrange to get the city to do it. We don't need Biggs hanging around for 5 years to be in the same position as these people.
Well, let's say you bought let's say you simplified the whole thing, and you bought the park for the $9.4 million note, or even bought it at 60 cents on the dollar in a bankruptcy fire sale, so you bought the park for $6 million. You own the hillside risk, the hillside slides. Now you have a relocation cost, right? You're a renter, and there's a hillside slide, you don't have any relocation costs, the owner does. So I'm happy being a renter. I choose that risk over being an owner.
But we're saying we'll hold him blameless if we're homeless. There's no relocation he's gonna have with, is there, under this?
There is, we're paying for it, but there is. In this deal, yes, there's a relocation.
That Biggs will pay for?
No.
No.
That's what I mean, we'll pay for it with him around or not,
Yeah, but no, you don't have to pay for it in this current status right now. As a renter, as a leasehold?
Well, individually, you go home.
No, correct.
Yeah.
You're protected by rent control. He bought a risky asset.
overpaid for it
Overpaid for it.
at a high market.
And yes, bought it at a peak of a market and bought something without doing his proper due diligence,
Exactly.
in my opinion.
Well, I think the question is, that nobody knows the answer to unless somebody does. What's gonna be his recourse when when he's not able to sell it to us?
He'll keep it as it is.
Reasonable, he'll try to put through another just and reasonable rent increase,
Right?
probably immediately.
I mean, that just seems like
He
his
might
whole
put it
deal.
on, he might put it on the market because, I'm thinking because he and his wife separated and they're trying to sell this asset and split it. So if he puts it on the market's half, if
Yeah.
not less than half of what it was when he
Then we
bought.
should buy it.
But there were all these repairs that need to be done to make it marketable, so why, how would
And
we
you
be able
can't
to
sell
sell
a
it?
property like
No,
this
it's
with a
just
hillside.
the liability
and-
is so great that you people aren't
So-
thinking about it.
Yeah,
You're
but there might be
getting it for
another
free,
stupid
and
person
it's not a
like
deal.
him.
Right.
It would be,
That will buy it and then make our lives miserable.
I've heard
Yeah, no, I was
nobody would
Sell it.
10 million
two
to sell.
things, there's people that are concerned that in the end, just no one wants to touch the liability, right?
Right?
So they would just sell it to some, there's people out there that would say, oh, I'll buy that land and wait it out to get the permits and the rezoning, close the park.
You can't rezone
Does
it.
it, but
It's slide
what
down.
and then and the PBR has said in our last meeting, it's never gonna be the same. From now on, I mean, this is the beginning, that it's not gonna stay as it is under LACD rent control, but that's not necessarily true.
No.
You're looking at all these things that have to, you've got LACD rent control, you've got the Mellow Act, you have a Supreme Court decision, it's like, it seems like much less of a risk just to hold out for that.
Right,
Not spend any money, not commit on a deal.
Yeah.
right.
I mean, I'm committed to a mortgage here. If I buy into this park, it's a lot of money.
It is.
I gotta kick down, and huge risk in this purchase where, why not just sit tight and wait and just see what happens? And then the risk of us losing this is still, we don't really know what's gonna happen. That's what drives everybody insane, is that we don't know what's gonna happen.
Well, you never know in
Nothing's
life.
set in stone.
Does anybody know when the case is supposed to be heard, the Supreme Court case?
January.
The date hasn't.
No, there's no date. There's no date. No, there's no date set.
Say it again.
All the briefs that are.
My comment is nothing new.
No, that's, but, yeah, and so,
No, but everybody that thinks it's good, thinks that we're at some crucial time where this is the magic time to get it for a steal.
This is
But
not
it
a
doesn't
steal.
seem like-
This is a ripoff.
Right, but,
Yeah.
you know, but
We're the ones
that's
being
what
stolen.
all of the people that are gung-ho for doing it are saying.
no, I wrote a blue flyer a few weeks ago about what's in the PSA and what I think should be in the PSA. And a lot of it was about what does the seller pay versus what does the buyer pay. And in my opinion, there was a lot of stuff that I'm not against owning the park. I don't think it's a bad idea. I'm against this particular transaction.
I agree.
So,
Yeah.
my assessment of this deal, not of the concept of park ownership, but of this deal, is that the buyer assumes virtually all the risks. There's no hillside fix in this. There's just a funding plan to fix the hillside. So if you got to closing on day one, let's say 3 years from today, November 2014, is that right? Yeah. So November 2014, on December 3rd, 2014, there's a massive landslide. We haven't had time to fix the hillside yet, but we own the park, right? We're buying a plan, we're not buying an actual hillside fix.
Well, and isn't it even really before that?
If it's
I
before,
think
yes, well,
at
resident
the Monday
relocation.
meeting, I think it sort of came out that the minute it gets ratified, there's a,
There's a question mark.
Right.
Because all of these, it's to the question of what's normal operating expense versus what's improvement. And there's one clause in there that did talk about future slides, but it doesn't, I haven't seen it in all the clauses.
and regardless, we lose our ability to
Sue,
sue, so.
right.
So,
Um,
what
Yeah.
you would have sue, you just would have the right to pull out of the contract if you did. You can't waive your right to sue, you have a statutory right to sue.
So why are
Doesn't
you
it
asked to
say
sign a form that
that
says I won't sue?
We won't sue?
No, that's separate, that's a contract. You still have the right to sue, but if you exercise that right, then he could say, I don't wanna sell the park to you anymore. It's
Ah.
almost the same thing, but it's not
It
saying
is.
that you don't have a right to sue. You always have a right to sue. You can't